I've owned rental properties for almost 15 years. Small duplexes, a few single-family homes, and one modest commercial strip in town. Nothing massive, nothing flashy, just steady investments that pay the bills and keep growing over time. One of those properties sat inside a quiet suburban neighborhood governed by an HOA. Now, if you've ever dealt with a homeowners association, you already know how that can go. Some HOAs are reasonable. Others treat the neighborhood like their personal kingdom. Unfortunately, the HOA president in this neighborhood fell firmly into the second category. Her name was Karen. And yes, she lived up to the stereotype. About 2 years ago, I rented that house to a young couple named Daniel and Priya. They were exactly the kind of tenants every landlord hopes for. Quiet, responsible, paid rent early every month. Daniel worked as a software engineer remotely, and Priya was finishing her nursing program. They kept the yard tidy, didn't throw parties, and even sent me photos whenever something minor needed fixing. Honestly, if all tenants were like them, property management would be a dream. For the first 6 months, everything was peaceful. Then Karen noticed them. It started with an email, not to the tenants, to me. Inside the email was a list of infractions. Apparently Daniel's car had been parked on the street overnight. The trash bin had been visible from the sidewalk, and the grass was approaching unacceptable length. Now, the grass had been cut 4 days earlier. But HOAs have a special talent for measuring grass like they're conducting a scientific experiment. I replied politely. I told Karen the tenants were following the rules, and I would remind them about the trash bin placement. She responded with a 2-paragraph lecture about community standards. I shrugged it off. At the time, I didn't realize that was just the beginning. Within 2 weeks, Karen began emailing almost daily. New violations appeared out of nowhere. A garden hose left out too long. A delivery package on the porch. Daniel washing his car in the driveway. Technically, none of these broke the HOA bylaws. But Karen interpreted the rules the way dictators interpret constitutions. Daniel eventually called me. "Hey, I don't want to cause problems," he said nervously. "But the HOA president keeps coming by the house." Coming by. Yeah. She walks up the driveway and takes pictures. That got my attention. Technically, the driveway was private property. HOA officials don't get to wander wherever they want. I told Daniel to politely ask her to stay off the property next time. He tried. Karen didn't like that. A week later, I received another email. This one had a different tone. Then came the line that made me laugh: eviction. That's when I realized Karen had no idea what she was talking about. HOAs can issue fines. They can place liens, but they cannot evict tenants from a privately owned property. Only the property owner can start eviction proceedings. Still, I kept things professional. I replied with a short message explaining the HOA didn't have eviction authority. Karen responded with 3 paragraphs of legal jargon copied from somewhere online. Clearly, she believed she was right. I decided not to escalate. Big mistake. Karen started visiting the house in person. Often. Daniel later showed me security camera footage. She would stand in front of the property with a clipboard, writing notes and snapping pictures. Sometimes she knocked on the door. Sometimes she didn't. Once she even told Priya that renters lower the value of the neighborhood. That crossed a line. I sent Karen a formal notice asking her to stop harassing my tenants. Her reply was immediate. The HOA will take necessary action. I should have guessed what she meant. Called me sounding panicked. Someone taped a notice to the front door, he said. A notice. It says we have 7 days to vacate the property. My stomach dropped. I asked him to send me a photo. The document looked official at first glance. It had the HOA letterhead, bold red text across the top. It claimed the tenants had violated multiple community standards and must leave within 7 days or face legal enforcement. There was just one problem. It was completely fake. HOAs cannot evict tenants. Not legally. Not even close. Karen had essentially tried to scare my tenants into leaving. I was furious. But instead of reacting emotionally, I decided to handle things carefully. I called Karen directly. She answered with the confident tone of someone who thinks they've already won. I assume you're calling about the eviction notice, she said. Yes, I replied calmly. You can't evict my tenants. They're violating HOA policies. That still doesn't give you eviction authority. She sighed dramatically. Landlords like you are exactly why neighborhoods decline. I almost laughed. Karen, that document you posted is not legally valid. It will be once the HOA board approves it. That's when I realized something. Karen didn't just misunderstand the rules. She truly believed she had power she didn't have. And people like that rarely back down. So, I changed my strategy. I simply said, all right, let's see how this plays out. Here's something Karen didn't know. Remember that commercial strip I mentioned earlier? The small row of businesses downtown. Well, I bought that property about 8 years ago when the previous owner retired. It's nothing fancy. A coffee shop,
un nail salon,
a dry cleaner, and one real estate office. That real estate office happened to employ a very familiar person.
Karen. Yes.
The same HOA president who was threatening my tenants worked as an office manager for the real estate agency renting space in my commercial strip. But I didn't recognize her at first. I rarely visited the property myself. A management company handled most tenant relations. So Karen had absolutely no idea who owned the building she worked in. Until the day everything came together. A week after the fake eviction notice, the HOA scheduled a special meeting. Karen sent an email inviting me to attend. The message had a smug tone. It claimed the board would review enforcement options regarding my property. I decided to go, not because I was worried, but because I wanted to see how far Karen would push things. The meeting took place in the neighborhood clubhouse. About 15 residents showed up. Karen sat at the front table like a judge. When she saw me walk in, she smiled politely. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind people use when they think they're about to win. Karen started the meeting with a long speech about maintaining community standards. Then she displayed photos on a projector. Photos of my rental property, Daniel's car, the trash bin, the garden hose. She spoke as if she were presenting evidence in a courtroom. Finally, she announced, due to repeated violations and lack of cooperation from the property owner, the HOA recommends removal of the tenants. Some residents looked confused. A few nodded. Then Karen added the line that sealed her fate. If necessary, we will pursue legal eviction. Karen, I said calmly, you can't evict tenants from a property you don't own. She crossed her arms. The HOA has legal authority. No, I replied. It doesn't. Some residents started whispering. Karen looked irritated. Well, the board will consult legal counsel. That's a good idea, I said. Because that eviction notice you posted could be considered harassment. The room grew quiet. Karen's face turned red. You're threatening the HOA now. Not at all, I said. I'm simply stating facts. She slammed her folder shut. This meeting is adjourned. And just like that, everyone started leaving. But Karen wasn't finished.
Not yet.
2 days later, Daniel called again. This time the police had shown up. Karen had reported the tenants for trespassing.
Yes.
Trespassing. In the house they were legally renting. The officers quickly realized the complaint made no sense and left after Daniel showed them the lease agreement. But now I was done being patient. Karen had crossed too many lines. So the next morning I made one phone call. I asked him a simple question. Who manages the real estate office tenant? He checked his records. Oh, that would be Karen. I smiled.
Perfect.
Has their lease renewal been processed yet? Actually, it's up next month. Even better. I told him I'd handle the renewal personally. 3 days later, I drove to the commercial strip. I walked into the real estate office around noon. Karen sat behind the front desk. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes widened slightly. Recognition. But confusion too. Hello, she said cautiously.
Y Karen, y Raplia.
Her posture stiffened. What are you doing here? I wanted to talk about a lease. She frowned. Our broker handles leases. Not this one. Then I placed a folder on the desk. The property ownership documents. And the lease agreement. Karen stared at the papers. Slowly, the color drained from her face. Yes, I said calmly. I'm the landlord. For the first time since this entire situation began, Karen was speechless. Karen opened her mouth,
Closed it.
then tried again. You own this building. That's right. The silence in the office felt heavy. One of the agents nearby stopped typing and looked over. Karen's confidence had completely vanished. She finally managed to say, "You can't retaliate because of HOA disagreements." I nodded. "You're absolutely right." Then I slid the lease renewal across the desk. "That's why I'm here to discuss your upcoming lease terms." Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the paper. The new rent amount was printed clearly. It was significantly higher than before. Karen's eyes widened. "That's a huge increase." "Commercial rates have gone up," I replied. She looked like she might faint. Karen finally understood something important. For months she had been trying to push around my tenants, threatening eviction, calling police, posting fake notices, all while working in a building I owned. And now her company needed that building to continue operating. The balance of power had shifted completely. She stared at me and asked quietly, "Is this because of the HOA situation?" I smiled politely. "Not at all." Then I added, "But I do expect professional behavior from people I do business with." Karen didn't say another word. Within a week, two things happened. First, the HOA stopped contacting my tenants entirely. No more emails. No more complaints. No more visits. Second, the real estate company called me directly to discuss their lease renewal. Apparently, Karen had not explained the situation very well. Their broker was extremely polite. We eventually reached a fair agreement, but one condition was clear. Karen would no longer be involved in any HOA actions related to my property. Daniel and Priya still live in that house today. They've never had another problem with the HOA. Karen is still the office manager at the real estate agency. But every time I stop by the commercial strip, she avoids eye contact. And she never once mentioned eviction again. Sometimes the people who try hardest to control others forget to check who actually holds the power. And Karen learned that lesson the hard way.